Hello and welcome to the Clever2gether Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about conventional organizations and making them shift. I've got John Varela on the show. He's an agile thinker bringing disruption into conventional organizations. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So John's joining me from Phoenix in the US, and he's very keen to have a really outcome-oriented approach, really purpose-led. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the communication that gets him to that. So let's ask you straight away then. I know that you have a background in agile, but you're moving more towards leadership. What has led that shift for you?
Yeah, good question. I think what's led that shift was a few years back when I realized, really clarify what I felt my purpose is. And I wanted to be in a situation where I'm continuously supporting people in just loving what they're doing, contributing in something that they believe in, and just love working with the people around them. And I think that right there was the trigger where I'm like, okay, I didn't need my title or role specifically to define my capability in that realm. And so once that was unlocked, I've just been hard pressing going and
Excellent.
Really observant.
Sounds very rewarding, certainly. Yeah. So in terms of breaking convention, then, it kind of starts and stops with communications. So what are the what are the communication tips that you have going into an organization where perhaps one or two people are keen to change things up a bit, try something new, but then you've got the older ones, or they might not actually be that much older, but they might not be that keen to try something new. They want to, do what they've always done because it's always worked, kind of.
Exactly right, kind of. Yeah, I think whenever we talk about change, right, one element that's common with that is the fear of change. And it's not so much actually what I've observed, it's not so much actually the fear of change. It's the fear of being uncomfortable, because it's easy to understand the benefit for any given change. It's also very easy to understand how that benefit is not aligned with what I feel like I'm doing today that's making me successful today. And so there's a little bit of that, I don't want to say fear, but just sense of being uncomfortable and really unsure if this is going to also lead to me feeling successful.
So and I think there's this thing, isn't there, this potential embarrassment if it all goes pear-shaped. What will I look like? What will happen to my reputation? What will people think I've got no idea what I'm doing? There is this embarrassment factor, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely a little bit. And I think that's where leadership and even management can really play a critical role in helping to reinforce the ability to feel safe to try something.
Yeah, psychological safety is huge, isn't it? And yet, in a lot of organization, it's, in the day-to-day running of things, bearing in mind we're not in there every day, these things do get forgotten about, and it's easy to slip into the back of your mind, isn't it? So how could you help an organization keep it front of mind?
Some of the ways that I think that you can really do this is by using their own words and reiterate it back to them. It's a little bit like a coaching mindset, by just listening, observing, and sharing and reiterating. But you can do this with values. A lot of companies have corporate values, and they're generally pretty powerful words. And so one of the things that I focus in on is the verb form of that word. So for example, if you're a company or if you're a person that values what it means to be aligned, for example, right? You can certainly identify this noun of this thing called being aligned, which is maybe having a common understanding of something. But really the action of being aligned is demonstrated through transparency. So what does it look like to be transparent? What are the opportunities to go out and talk to someone? Or I'll give you an example. Actually, you can have say an all hands or a town hall or something like that, where you're having someone give some sort of conversation or an overview about something. If there is not an opportunity for people to ask questions or even answer those questions, then I would say that even though you're showing a form of transparency through the delivery of some information, to value transparency means I should be able to receive any type of questions or feedback in order to restate and build that alignment between the person who's listening and consuming and learning.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think very often, that the lack of time to ask questions often comes down to two things. It comes down to a lack of time management. So people don't actually plan their time very effectively when they go into the meeting. If they're going to give a presentation, they don't time the presentation, that kind of thing. But also there is a slight ego problem sometimes. The person, in charge wants to be the one giving the answers and so on, but they don't really want the awkwardness of questions that might not be easy to answer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And people feel that, by the way. It's one of the reasons when you do open an opportunity up for questions, you don't get any questions. And it's not because it's still sinking in. It goes back to that feeling of safety. Well, can I really ask this question? I think it might be perceived as a little bit challenging, right? And so there is a responsibility for anyone who's giving a talk to set the tone and say, listen, I really value communication. I really value our ability to have this shared understanding, but also that you feel that you are contributing towards the health of whatever we're trying to align on. When you can set the tone that way and really demonstrate it, then people will believe it and act on it and try it.
Yeah, and I think if you believe it, if you genuinely do want to have the questions, it will come over.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think actually what you can also do is, and this is a trick that I've used a couple of times, where I've had, I really enjoy answering questions at the end, because that often gives me something to think about or raises an example or something like that I couldn't fit into the presentation. So then sometimes it's a good idea to have somebody in the audience who can plant a couple of questions for you if they are needing that time to kind of process what you've just said. Maybe their mind is kind of like, how can I adapt that to what I'm doing? And what about this team here? And they've got this mind whir going on. So that means that they're not necessarily disinterested, they're just kind of still processing. So if you've got one question coming at you from somebody who you feel comfortable with, or maybe you could ask somebody in the audience, if they'd like to answer that, you can kind of get through to it that way. It's always good to have a few questions set up so that you can kind of start the ball rolling. And I think, again, that kind of sets the tone and makes it more genuine, because you're kind of feeding questions out and saying, come on, give me some questions,
Definitely. And I think that's why I was mentioning, when you value alignment, what you start to untap, or what you start to uncover, is you begin to rethink your current structures. Do I really need to give this as a presentation? Do I really need to have us be a one-way monologue where I'm hoping to get some questions afterwards? Do I really need to deliver this message in a way where someone has to process it and consume it before they can think on it? If you go in rethinking a little bit about your approach and your tactics, you begin with trying to be more interactive. I mean, I've seen it in presentations. They try to do more surveys, life data, that kind of thing. And then they forget to go back and connect the dots about how that survey connects with the message. Still some improvement there, but it's a start.
At least it shows willing. It's a first step in the right direction. Yeah. No, I think, these days there is so much data out there. It's very easy to get, to get distracted at the end of an event and not actually go back and look at that data. But it's really, really fundamental. And if you can't do it yourself, then get somebody else to do it for you, because I think it's really important to pull in that information and analyze it and see what you can learn from that, because otherwise you're actually wasting people's time, and people won't feel valued, and they certainly won't contribute next time if they feel that they're just being ignored.
Exactly.
So when it comes to being outcome orientated, I'm sure you sometimes go into an organization and they say, but we are outcome orientated. We've been outcome orientated for years.
Yes, definitely. You have to redefine what it, or not maybe redefine, but just ask, what does it mean? What outcomes you're talking about? Outcomes for who, I think really matters. Um, yeah, because you hear a lot of these buzzwords that come out. Um, Measuring what matters, for example, is another one. Matters to who, right?
Mm,
And if your outcome is statistically based, or it is a statistic in itself, there has to be some level of acknowledgement that there's a dependency to understand how this still connects to what we're trying to do as the outcome, right? A number itself can't really truly be an outcome unless it has some story behind it.
mm, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's interesting, isn't it? With the pandemic and everything, I think we've been forced to think about outcomes and productivity in a different way. Obviously, it's easy, like we talked about briefly actually in last week's episode with Joanna Rothman. It's easy to measure time in, time out. It's very easy to measure. But the performance of an agile team, for instance, is not so easy to measure because it's a team effort for a start. But also, there are some people on the team who aren't physically doing anything, but they are the one that are clearing the blockages and making sure everything's running and got coffee and all of this kind of stuff that keeps the whole machinery moving along and makes it a smooth kind of experience. So it's important, I think, to measure just like before, but we're going to have to think of more unique ways of doing that. Do you have any suggestions for companies going into that?
Oh, definitely. So a little bit of a traditional mindset is to assume that every measure needs to be a metric, and that furthermore that metric needs to be quantifiable. You can begin the process by really understanding what it is that you want to measure. So even though it may be harder, I wouldn't say it's impossible. You have to be a little bit more creative and more deliberate. When you can, in that example that you provided, right, where the team is going through obstacles and resolving them and going through it, like you really want to define what it means to what it means to be high performing. It's not always highly productive. In fact, the more productive you are, there's a good chance you're actually less effective. So if you were to go
I
back
didn't.
and
Could you just say that for me? I didn't quite catch it again.
yeah, sure. So in order, what did I say? I said that in order, oh, I'm sorry. I don't exactly know how I said it, so I'll just paraphrase this here.
Yeah, you said about
So,
high performing.
oh yes. So what it means to be high performing doesn't always mean that you're going to be highly productive. What
Right.
it means is you're valuing being more effective. And if you think of, there's a very popular phrase. I think it's actually the title of a book. Um, what is that phrase? Oh my gosh,
It's okay. Take your time.
I got it.
I'm not going
Oh,
anywhere.
yes. So in fact, there's a pretty commonly known phrase called half or twice the work in half the time,
Oh yeah.
right? Yeah. And so almost by default, the assumption is, well, if I increase my productivity, I'll get twice the work done in half the time. But really what it's about is getting twice the value in half the time because you're scrapping out all of the waste that that you currently are supporting. How do we
Mm,
become more effective so that we actually get more done in the least amount of effort possible? And that's a value. If you don't really truly value that, then it becomes really hard to understand how to measure it because you're sort of going backwards. You're starting with, well, this is how we're going to measure it, and I don't really care how it connects back to my values. Start with your values. Um, Understand what it is that you really want out of your outcomes. A lot of the times, I think we will start with outcomes and think about the behaviors, and then build structures to support the behaviors. Um, but every time you want to make an improvement to those behaviors, it's connected back to what you're currently valuing. And if you're valuing quantitative data, for example, as your be all end all, then any sort of outcome oriented structure improvement is hard to justify. It's hard to feel like, yeah, that's a good decision. And I think
mm,
that the biggest thing is let's start with our values. What do we really want out of this team? How do we define what it looks like for a team to be high performing? And I would describe that as uh, almost being its own uh, conscious being. I don't know. I grew up watching cartoons or even like Power Rangers, right? And you get these, you got these different colored of heroes sort of coming together to be like this really big, transformer type thing. That's what a high performing team is when you've actually been able to come together and become something new. So understand what that is, try to visualize what that is, and then you'll begin to extrapolate the behaviors which are different from the individuals on your team.
Yeah, and I think if anyone's been in a team like that, they will know that dynamic feeling when everyone's pulling together and it doesn't seem like an effort. Everyone is just like so focused on that end goal that it just becomes like like a married couple that don't have to say anything to each other. It's just like they're all, it's just autopilot, but not in a boring way, but in a really dynamic, like just happens.
And that feeling right there, that's what it means to be highly effective.
Yeah.
Right. You don't care as much about like how am I really spending my time. It's I'm just focusing on this. And this is why even when we're having fun, time seems to fly by. It's because we're doing what we really want to do. So we're having
That's
fun
right. That's right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, cool. So in terms of sorry, let me think about this. In terms of being uncomfortable then, do you have any techniques that you use to get them out of their comfort zone? Do you use things like mirror boards, or do you have any other tools that you'd like to share with us?
Or before techniques? I jump in, yeah, definitely focus on techniques more than tools. So first you have to acknowledge that the comfort is real. It's okay to be uncomfortable. And you're not trying to convince the person that it's okay to be uncomfortable. What you're trying to do is understand what makes them uncomfortable. And oftentimes, this is where I come in with the visualizations about connecting the dots and partnering with different people. Sometimes you want to partner with HR. Sometimes you need to partner with managers. Sometimes you need to partner with just other folks, direct reports, stakeholders, and really begin to align on what it means to really have that outcome in mind. So that comfort comes from maybe, okay, well, if we're going to make the team more effective, how is that going to influence my performance review, for example, right? And that may be an opportunity to exploit. Well, if you were to demonstrate our core value, right, does that actually take you away from doing well in your performance review? There's an opportunity to improve. So it's about understanding that there's really valid reasons for being uncomfortable, and then checking the structures in place that support the current state first. So work with managers and work with people in performance management, for example, and say, listen, we want to create this thing which is a high performing team. This is what a high performing team looks like. What improvements do we need to make in our reviews, for example, or check-ins, one-on-ones, whatever you've got in place? How do we look at our retrospectives differently? How do we look at our stand-ups differently? And then sort of approach it from that perspective. And that's where the visualization really helps.
Absolutely. And your visualization, is that like, with, getting people to close their eyes and really trying to imagine like the ideal team, or is that something else for you?
It is something else. It's more like a whiteboard. So I guess there's an opportunity there to pause, think it through, close your eyes, meditate on this, come with ideas. But really the product of that exercise is to put things on the board. You can do
a physical board now.
Yes, definitely. Or a digital board, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
You can have a whiteboard with a bunch of nodes connected with lines. You can do even I've seen it even done with like a Kanban style board, where we've got these different columns. We're trying to move through the improvements. So there's a lot of tools out there. Be creative, I think. Don't get locked into any single solution. Just know that you're always focusing this next step to get closer to that outcome.
Excellent. Okay, then. So I know that you're quite an avid reader, and you go to a lot of community events and what was the word that you used? You go to quite a few agile groups and communities. Do you want to tell us about some of the ones that you're getting a lot of enjoyment and value out of at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. If you are working through Scrum, for example, right? Working through Scrum, you want to get better at understanding what it is, not so much how to really do it well, but I guess there's a little bit of that in there. The scrum.org forums are a great place to start being active, because although you have some experts in there and they're providing answers to questions, and not only can you ask those questions, but you can be a contributor to answering those questions. And that's where you're going to learn a lot, is
Oh,
by
absolutely. Yeah.
sharing what you're thinking and getting, I don't want to say getting corrected, but just learning. So there's always ways to learn there. And I did that for a good while, just every day, half an hour in the morning, just visit the forums, answer a question if you can, or ask one, and go from there. Participation is critical, I would say.
Yeah, that's very important. Yeah.
And
Okay.
then check out, sorry.
No, go for it. I'd love
Oh,
some
okay.
more. Yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna say also, and check out Slack. Yeah, and sorry. I would also recommend that you check out any Slack groups that are available. If you are reading something from a common source, chances are they've got a Slack group for it. I
Right.
follow the Business Agility Institute. They have a Slack channel for things like that. Those are great opportunities to also just talk with people and work through challenges, share ideas. I mean, obviously, it's critical that those groups are open to new people and having conversation. The Hands-on Agile Slack group is also really good.
Hands-on Agile. Yeah, I'm in that one actually. Yeah. In fact, I think that's how we met.
That's right.
Mhm.
That's another really good one.
So just to recap for anybody who's running and they haven't had a chance to process that, there was Scrum.org forums, then there was Business Agility. Am I missing a word there? Business Agility
It's called, yes, Business Agility
Institute, and then Hands-on Agile, and any Slack. You know, if you've been to any events, they very often have a Slack, don't they, or something attached to that. Okay, great. And do you have any books that you could recommend for us? Because we're always keen to find out about new books.
Yes, I have actually I have a book and a video recommendation here.
Yeah, great. Let's hear it.
All right. So so as far as a video goes, on YouTube, TED Talks are great. I love watching TED Talks, but there's one in particular I want to call out, which is called where did it go?
It's okay.
Oh my God.
It's okay. I can cut all this out. It's no problem.
Okay. Oh, here it is. Okay. Yeah, there's one YouTube video I would definitely check out. It's a TED Talk. It's called "To Find Work You Love, Don't Follow Your Passion," and it's from Benjamin Todd. And it's really good. I don't want to spoil anything beyond the title here, so I think it's like an 8-minute video.
Okay, I'll put the details in the show notes. That sounds good.
Yeah, definitely check it out.
Find Work You Love. Okay, and the book?
And the book here, I would say, is I've always liked Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last book, because a lot of the challenges that we find through communication, through leadership, it's agnostic to agile. It doesn't have to be an agile element here. Leadership is leadership. And you don't even need to be in a leader position today, or even be an aspiring leader. I think just understanding what it means to be a leader, and you can sort of figure out for yourself where you sort of fit in that circle. I think having a common understanding of what healthy leadership looks like is quite powerful.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like you say, it doesn't have to be just because you want to be some big leader yourself, because I think, agile teams, for example, are anyway very flat, very, there isn't this hierarchy anymore, but you can still have a big impact on people, without being the leader,
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, John. It was a pleasure speaking to you, and I will speak to the rest of my listeners next Thursday for a new episode of Clever Together. Until then, have a fabulous week, and remember, be the very best communicator that you can be. Take care now. It's Corinne Wilhelm from Bite-Sized English. Goodbye.